The Chicago cemetery was supposed to be empty at that hour, just wind, fallen leaves, and the silence of names carved in stone. But when the Mafia boss, Damian Vance, stepped toward his daughter's grave, he heard something he had never expected to hear again in that place. A child quietly sobbing. He stopped. No bodyguards, no noise, just a tiny girl kneeling in front of the tombstone that belonged to his daughter. Her small shoulders trembled. Her fingers traced the engraved name as if she'd known it her whole life. Damian's breath caught in his throat. No one visited this grave but him. He approached slowly, boots crushing the gravel. "Little one, why are you here?" he asked. The girl flinched, wiping her tears, but didn't run. Instead, she held out a wrinkled, dirt-smudged letter. "This is for her," she whispered. She promised she'd read it, but she never came back. Damian froze. His daughter hadn't told him anything. Not about a letter, not about a little girl, not about a promise. His heart began to pound as the girl lifted her eyes. The same shade his daughter once had, and said 6 words that shattered the world of a man no one believed could break. "She was my real mom, too." Damian staggered back. The cemetery's fun. The truth he had buried with his daughter was clawing its way to the surface. And nothing in his empire, nothing in his past could have prepared him for what came next. While Damian's mind reeled, struggling to process the impossible weight of the little girl's words, a desperate sound shattered the quiet. The heavy iron gates of the cemetery groaned open, and frantic footsteps slopped against the wet pavement. Lily. The name was a desperate gasp cutting through the cold Chicago wind. Damian turned to see a young woman running toward them. She looked like someone the city had tried to grind into dust. Her thin canvas jacket was practically useless against the autumn chill, and the sole of her left shoe flapped slightly with every hurried step. She collided with the gravestone, dropping to her knees and pulling the little girl into a fierce, protective embrace. "I told you not to run off," she breathed, burying her face in the child's tangled hair. "You terrified me, Lily. Do you know what they would do if they found out you snuck out of the shelter?" Lily buried her face in the woman's worn jacket. "I had to bring the letter, Harper," the child sobbed. "I had to tell her I am sorry she went to heaven." Harper froze, her gaze shifting from the carved marble headstone to the tall, imposing man standing in the shadows. Damian Vance was not a man people looked at by accident. He radiated power, his dark wool coat pristine, his posture screaming of violence kept on a very short leash. The air around him felt heavy, dangerous. Harper pulled Lily tighter against her chest, her protective instincts overriding her obvious terror. "I apologize, sir," Harper said, her voice shaking but her chin lifting in defiance. "We did not mean to intrude on your morning. We are leaving right now." She tried to stand, pulling the little girl up with her, but Damian stepped forward, blocking the narrow gravel path. "You are not going anywhere," he commanded, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Harper's bones. Harper stepped back, placing her body entirely between the Mafia boss and the 7-year-old girl. "Listen to me," she said, her amber eyes flashing with a fierce, desperate fire. "I do not know who you are, but we do not want any trouble. I am just her caretaker at the group home." She was confused. She thought she knew the woman buried here. Damian looked at the child, who was peeking out from behind Harper's thin legs. Then he looked at Harper. He saw the exhaustion etched into the young woman's beautiful face, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she shielded the child as if she fully expected the world to strike them both. His daughter, his bright, secretive daughter, had been trying to adopt this little girl. She had been building a family in secret, and this fierce, broken woman was the only thing. Standing between his granddaughter and a cruel, indifferent system. "She is not confused," Damian said softly, though the edge in his voice made the fallen leaves seem to stop rustling. "The woman buried here is my daughter." Harper's breath hitched. Her eyes widened as she took in his expensive clothes, the unmistakable aura of untouchable authority, and the raw, bleeding grief hiding just beneath the surface. "You are the father," Harper whispered, the realization draining the color from her cheeks. "Isabella's father." She knew. This impoverished, fiercely loyal caretaker knew his daughter's name. A primal, territorial instinct roared to life inside Damian's chest. For 3 months, he had been drowning in whiskey and rage, convinced he had lost everything that mattered. Now, standing in the freezing rain, he was looking at a terrified child who shared his daughter's heart and a fiercely protective woman who had braved the darkness to keep that child safe. Harper tried to edge around him, her grip on Lily's hand tightening until her knuckles turned white. "Please, sir, we really must get back before lockdown, or they will support us." Damian looked at the frayed tape on her shoe, the bruises of exhaustion on her skin, and the desperate love in her eyes. His empire was built on blood, but right now, all he felt was an overwhelming need to shield them from the cold. "Lockdown," Damian repeated, the word tasting like poison. "No one is putting this child, or you, behind a locked door ever again." He pulled his phone from his pocket, his dark eyes locking onto Harper's terrified gaze. "You are not going back to that shelter. You are coming with me." The ride in the black SUV was suffocatingly quiet. Harper held Lily so tightly her arms ached, her amber eyes darting toward the heavy doors of the vehicle as if expecting a trap. Damian Vance sat opposite them, a shadow carved from stone, his dark eyes missing nothing. The rain battered the tinted windows, blurring the neon lights of Chicago into streaks of bleeding color. "St. Jude's Home for Children," Harper whispered as the vehicle pulled up to a towering, grim brick building that looked more like a prison than a sanctuary. The iron gates were rusted, the courtyard barren. Damian felt a cold fury twisting in his chest. His daughter had been coming to this rotting place, smiling and bringing light to the darkness, while he had been blind to it all. He stepped out of the vehicle, the freezing wind whipping at his coat, and signaled for his driver to wait. Harper hesitated, clutching Lily's small hand. "Mr. Vance, you cannot just walk in there," she warned, her voice trembling. "The director, Mrs. Gable, she is ruthless. She will call the police. She hates when anyone questions her authority." Damian did not even break his stride. "Let her call them," he said, his voice a low, lethal rumble. The lobby of the shelter smelled of cheap bleach and despair. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly pallor over the peeling paint. A sharp-faced woman behind the reception desk snapped her head up as they entered. "Harper, you foolish girl," Mrs. Gable snarled, rising from her chair with a look of venomous triumph. "Sneaking out the rat again? I told you if you broke the rules one more time, I would have you thrown out on the street and the child transferred to the state ward." Harper instinctively stepped in front of Lily, her shoulders bracing for a blow she had clearly taken before. But before the cruel woman could take another step, Damian moved. He bypassed Harper entirely, closing the distance to the reception desk with the silent, terrifying grace of a predator. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mrs. Gable's arrogant sneer faltered as she finally registered the tall, broad-shouldered man standing before her. "Who are you?" she demanded, though her voice had lost its sting. "I am the man who is taking them," Damian stated simply. He reached inside his coat, a gesture that made the director flinch, but he only withdrew a sleek black phone. He dialed a number and held it to his ear, his dead eyes fixed on the trembling woman. "Vincent, I am at St. Jude's on 4th Street. Bring the emergency custody papers. Buy the judge if you have to. I want this building shut down by tomorrow morning." He ended the call and tossed a thick stack of $100 bills onto the scratched wooden counter. "That is for the damage I will do to this place if you ever speak to either of them like that again." Mrs. Gable stared at the money, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "You cannot do this," she whispered, terrified. "There are laws. There are procedures." Damian leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that echoed with the weight of 1,000 buried secrets. "I own the laws in the city, and right now my patience is the only procedure keeping you breathing." Harper watched the exchange with wide, disbelieving eyes. She had spent 2 years fighting this corrupt system, begging for scraps of dignity for the children, and this stranger had dismantled it in 3 minutes. "Get your things," Damian ordered, turning back to Harper. The harshness in his voice faded completely when he looked at the young woman and the little girl. "Only what you need. We are leaving." Harper nodded numbly. She led Lily up 3 flights of creaking stairs to a cramped, freezing room they shared with 4 other beds. It took her exactly 2 minutes to pack their entire lives into a single, frayed canvas duffel bag. A few faded picture books, Lily's extra sweater, and Harper's mother's silver locket. As they hurried back down the corridor, Harper glanced out the cracked hallway window. Her breath caught. Parked across the street, half hidden in the shadows of a broken street lamp, was a dark gray sedan. A man with a scarred neck was leaning against the hood, smoking a cigarette, his eyes fixed perfectly on the shelter entrance. A cold spike of pure terror drove into Harper's heart. The bad men. The ones Lily had whispered about in the dark. They had found them. She grabbed Lily's hand tighter and practically ran down the remaining stairs, colliding heavily into Damian's solid chest in the lobby. He caught her instantly, his large, warm hands steadying her trembling frame. "What is it?" he demanded, feeling the sudden spike of panic radiating from her. Outside, Harper gasped, pointing a shaking finger toward the doors. "There is a man. Lily's mother. The people who hurt her. They are watching the building." Damian's expression did not change, but his eyes went completely black, swallowed by a murderous, protective rage. He pulled his coat off and draped it over Harper's shivering shoulders, the heavy wool smelling of expensive cologne and gunmetal. He picked Lily up in one arm, holding her securely against his chest, and used his free hand to firmly grip Harper's waist. "Keep your head down," he commanded, his touch sending an unexpected jolt of heat straight through Harper's terrified body. "No one is going to touch you. Not tonight. Not ever." He guided them out into the freezing storm, stepping directly into the crosshairs of an invisible war, ready to burn Chicago to ashes to keep them safe. The private elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a world that felt colder than the freezing rain they had just left behind. Damian Vance's penthouse hovered 50 stories above the Chicago streets, a sprawling fortress of bulletproof glass, polished black marble, and brushed steel. It smelled of expensive leather and absolute silence. There were no photographs, no discarded shoes, no signs of life. It was the sterile, immaculate perfection of a man who had stopped living 3 months ago. Harper stepped out hesitantly, the heavy wool of Damian's coat still draped over her trembling shoulders. She kept Lily tucked firmly against her side, her worn canvas shoes sinking into an imported rug that likely cost more than she would earn in a lifetime. The little girl's eyes were wide as saucers as she took in the cavernous living room. 4 men in dark suits stood at the perimeter, their postures rigid, their eyes scanning the shadows like wolves guarding a den. "This is your home now," Damian said, his deep voice breaking the unnatural quiet. Harper swallowed hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was a woman used to invisibility, surviving in the cracks of a broken city, and now she was standing in the center of an underworld king's throne room. "It is very big," Lily whispered, clutching her battered stuffed rabbit to her chest. "It feels like a museum." A muscle feathered in Damian's jaw, the innocent observation hitting him like a physical blow. He gestured to a silver-haired housekeeper who had materialized from the darkened hallway. "Agnes will show you to the guest wing. Get them whatever they need. Food, dry clothes, anything." As Agnes led them away, Damian stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city lights bleed through the relentless storm. He felt the phantom weight of his gun holstered at his ribs. His world was built on violence, on calculated strikes, and ruthless dominance. He had brought them here to protect them, yet he wondered if his darkness would only poison them. But an hour later, when he walked down the hall to check on his sudden guests, the scent of violence had been replaced by something entirely foreign. the smell of warm milk and honey. He paused outside the half-open door of the guest suite. The massive, imposing king-sized bed remained empty. Instead, Harper had dragged the thick down duvet onto the plush carpet, creating a cozy, makeshift nest near the flickering fireplace. She was kneeling beside Lily, murmuring a soft, rhythmic lullaby while she braided the little girl's damp hair. Harper had changed into one of his oversized gray cotton shirts, the fabric engulfing her fragile frame, yet she looked stronger than any soldier in his syndicate. She was humming, carefully wrapping the child in a cocoon of safety that no bulletproof glass could ever replicate. Damian leaned against the doorframe, his dark eyes locked on the gentle, soothing sway of Harper's hands. She looked up, her amber eyes catching the golden firelight. She did not flinch at the sight of the notorious Mafia boss standing in the shadows. She was afraid of the big bed, Harper whispered, her voice a soft balm in the sterile room. The shelter beds were small. Too much open space scares her. Damian stared at the makeshift nest, his chest tightening with an unfamiliar, suffocating ache. He had bought this fortress to keep his enemies out, but he had managed to lock out everything good in the world along with them. "And what scares you, Harper?" he asked quietly, stepping into the room. The air shifted, growing heavy with an unspoken tension. Harper paused her braiding. She looked at his scarred hands, the hands that had built an empire of blood, and then up to his eyes, which held a raw, devastating sorrow. "Men who think money and walls can fix broken things," she answered honestly, her chin lifting with that same fierce defiance he had seen in the cemetery. "I cannot fix what happened to her," Damian admitted, his voice dropping to a gravelly murmur as he knelt on the edge of the carpet, bringing his imposing frame down to their level. "But I can destroy the man who caused it." Harper studied his face, seeing the monster the world feared, but also the grieving father desperately trying to honor his daughter's last wish. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly, and gently adjusted the blanket over Lily's sleeping form. "She does not need a destroyer right now," Harper said softly. "She needs a protector." Damian's gaze dropped to her small, calloused hand resting near his own bruised knuckles. In all his 38 years, no one had ever looked at him and demanded tenderness. They only demanded blood, money, or mercy. "Damian," he corrected softly, his eyes returning to hers, burning with a possessive, territorial heat that made Harper's breath hitch in her throat. "Call me Damian." For the first time since his daughter died, the penthouse did not feel like a tomb. It felt like something was finally breathing inside its gilded walls, and as he watched Harper brush a stray dark curl from the sleeping child's forehead, the ruthless boss realized he would gladly tear apart the entire city to keep that breath alive. The morning sun fought through the heavy gray clouds of Chicago, casting long, sharp shadows across the polished marble floors of the penthouse. Harper sat at the massive mahogany dining table, her hands wrapped around a porcelain mug of coffee that she could barely taste. Lily was beside her, quietly coloring in a sketchbook Agnes had provided, her small feet dangling far above the floor. The gilded cage was safe, but the air was thick with the suffocating weight of an impending storm. The heavy oak doors to Damian's private office stood slightly ajar, and Harper could hear the low, dangerous murmur of men discussing violence. A moment later, Vincent, a man whose tailored suit could not hide the lethal grace of an executioner, stepped out and gestured for Harper. She instinctively reached for Lily's hand, her protective instincts flaring, and led the child into the dimly lit war room. Damian stood by a bank of glowing monitors, his white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to reveal dark ink sprawling across his forearms. He looked exhausted, yet thrumming with a terrifying, predatory energy. "Harper," Damian said softly, his dark eyes softening for a fraction of a second before hardening into obsidian. "I need you to look at something. And Lily, little one, I need you to be very brave for just a minute." Vincent tapped a key, and a high-resolution photograph materialized on the center screen. It was a grainy surveillance image of a man with dead, soulless eyes and a jagged, serpentine scar creeping up his neck. Harper felt the blood drain from her face. It was the same man she had seen leaning against the street lamp outside the shelter. Beside her, Lily dropped her crayon, her tiny body going completely rigid. "The bad man," the child whispered, her voice cracking with a terror so profound it made Harper's chest physically ache. "He was the one who came to our apartment when Mama hid me in the closet." Damian knelt slowly until he was eye level with the trembling little girl, completely ignoring the hardened criminals standing in the room. "What did this man do, Lily?" he asked, his voice a gentle, steady rumble that commanded absolute trust. Lily buried her face in Harper's side, sobbing quietly. Mama had a notebook. She cried into the oversized cotton shirt. She wrote down the bad things they did, the places they took the other girls. She said she had to give it to the police, but the man with the snake scar found us. He hurt her, and then they took her away. I only got away because Isabella found me hiding at the group home. The temperature in the room plummeted to absolute zero. Damian rose slowly, his massive frame blocking out the monitors. Vincent swore softly, running a hand over his face. "It is Nikolai," Vincent confirmed, the name tasting like ash. "The Russian syndicate. They have been running a massive trafficking ring through the shipping ports. If Lily's mother worked for them and kept a ledger, she was a liability." Harper held the weeping child tight against her heart, her amber eyes wide with horror as the devastating puzzle pieces finally snapped together. Isabella had not just been adopting an orphan. She had uncovered a monstrous criminal enterprise. The car crash, Harper breathed, looking up at Damian, whose face had gone completely blank, a mask of pure, unadulterated death. "Your daughter's accident. It was not an accident." Damian turned his face toward the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the sprawling city he controlled. For 3 months, he had blamed a drunk driver, a twist of cruel fate, burying his only child in the cold earth while he drowned in his own guilt. But she had been murdered. Murdered for trying to protect this innocent child from monsters. "Isabella was trying to find the ledger," Damian said, his voice so quiet it made the bulletproof glass seem to vibrate. "She was building a case to tear their entire operation apart, and they silenced her." Harper watched the terrifying transformation of the man before her. The grieving father was gone, replaced by the apex predator of the Chicago underworld. He turned back to them, his dark eyes locking onto Harper with a possessive, burning vow. "They think they buried the truth," Damian stated, walking slowly toward Harper until he was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his body, smelling of dark coffee and lethal intent. "They think they can hunt what is mine and live to see another sunrise." He reached out, his scarred thumb gently wiping a stray tear from Harper's pale cheek, the contrast of his violent hands performing such a tender act making her breath hitch. "Keep her safe in this room," Damian commanded, his gaze shifting from Harper to the sprawling cityscape below. "Because I am going to paint the streets of Chicago red until every single man who touched my daughter or threatened this child is nothing but ash." The first week inside the glass and steel fortress felt like living inside a diamond, beautiful but freezing cold. Yet, day by day, Harper began to thaw the rigid edges of Damian Vance's world. It started with small things. The sterile scent of chemical cleaners in the hallways was replaced by the warm, rich aroma of baking bread and melting chocolate as Harper commandeered the massive, untouched industrial kitchen. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Damian returned from a brutal interrogation at the docks, his knuckles bruised, his dark suit smelling of cheap cigar smoke and copper. He intended to walk straight to his study and pour a glass of whiskey, but the sound of genuine, uninhibited laughter stopped him dead in his tracks. It was a sound that had not echoed in the penthouse since Isabella was alive. He followed the noise, his heavy boots silent on the marble floor, until he reached the kitchen threshold. There was Harper, wearing one of his expensive white dress shirts as a makeshift apron, her face smudged with flour, spinning a giggling Lily in a slow circle. The little girl's eyes were bright, the terror of the past few days temporarily forgotten. Damian stood in the shadows, leaning against the doorframe, captivated by the woman who seemed completely oblivious to the empire of blood built around her. She was not a trained killer, she possessed no wealth, and yet she wielded a power he could not comprehend. She was putting the broken pieces of a child's soul back together with nothing but patience and warmth. When Harper finally noticed him, she froze, her amber eyes widening slightly as she took in his bruised hands and the dark, lethal exhaustion clinging to his frame. Instead of shrinking away in fear like everyone else in his life, she carefully set Lily down on a stool. "Lily, why do you not finish decorating those cookies while I talk to Mr. Vance?" Harper murmured gently. She walked toward Damian, stopping just inches away from him, close enough that he could smell the vanilla on her skin, completely overpowering the metallic scent of violence he carried. "You are bleeding," she observed quietly, her gaze dropping to his raw knuckles. Damian tensed, his jaw clenching. "It is nothing," he rasped, his voice rougher than he intended, "just business." Harper did not back down. She reached out, her small, flour-dusted fingers gently wrapping around his massive, scarred hand. The contrast was startling, the monster and the maiden, and the contact sent a violent jolt of electricity straight to Damian's chest. "There is a first aid kit in the bathroom," she said, her voice a soft command that no man in his syndicate would ever dare to give him. "Let me clean them." He wanted to pull away, to remind her that he was a dangerous man who did not deserve gentle touches, but he found himself utterly paralyzed by the fierce compassion in her eyes. He allowed her to lead him to the pristine marble bathroom, sitting on the edge of the oversized bathtub like an obedient soldier. Harper filled the sink with warm water, soaking a pristine white towel before kneeling between his parted legs. The intimacy of the position made the air in the room suddenly feel impossibly thin. Damian watched her intently as she carefully dabbed the dried blood from his skin. Her touch was incredibly light, treating his ruined hands as if they were something precious instead of instruments of destruction. "You do not have to do this," Damian whispered, the silence stretching between them like a taut wire. "You should be afraid of what these hands have done." Harper paused, her thumb tracing the edge of a faded, jagged scar across his palm. She slowly lifted her head, her amber eyes locking onto his dark, haunted gaze. "I know who you are, Damian," she answered, the use of his first name slipping past her lips like a quiet prayer. "I know the things you do to keep us safe. But I also know that a man who looks at a broken child with so much love in his eyes is not entirely a monster." Her words shattered something heavy and suffocating inside his ribcage. For years, he had been the apex predator, the ruthless king who rolled through terror, accepting that his soul was forever stained black. But looking at Harper, feeling the steady, rhythmic warmth of her hands on his, a dangerous, fragile spark of hope ignited within him. He slowly turned his hand, his large fingers intertwining with hers, capturing her small palm in his dominant grip. He leaned forward, closing the remaining distance between them until he could feel the soft, frantic flutter of her breath against his jaw. "You're playing a dangerous game, little bird," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that sent shivers racing down her spine. "I am not playing," Harper whispered back, her unwavering courage making his heart pound with a fierce, possessive rhythm. In that quiet, sterile room, the ice surrounding the Mafia boss's heart finally began to crack, melting under the gentle, resilient fire of a woman who had spent her entire life invisible, only to become the one thing he could not look away from. The armored black SUV navigated the slick, rain-soaked streets of Chicago like a steel leviathan. Damian had insisted on a private pediatric checkup for the deep, rattling cough Lily had developed during her time in the freezing shelter, taking no chances with the child's health. He had surrounded their vehicle with 2 heavy escort cars filled with his most lethal men, creating a rolling fortress. Harper sat in the spacious back seat, her arms securely wrapped around Lily, lulled by the rhythmic hum of the tires against the wet pavement. Damian sat opposite them, his dark eyes constantly scanning the gray blur of the city, his body coiled with a tension that never fully dissipated. The transition from the gilded penthouse to the exposed streets felt like stepping out of a vault and onto a battlefield. The first sign of danger was not a sound, but a brutal, jarring impact that defied physics. A massive, reinforced delivery truck ran a red light at 70 miles per hour, slamming catastrophically into their lead escort car and sending it spinning into a concrete pillar. The deafening screech of twisting metal was instantly followed by the terrifying, rhythmic popping of automatic gunfire. "Get down," Damian roared, his voice cutting through the chaos like thunder. He moved with a speed that defied his massive size, drawing a heavy black weapon from his shoulder holster before the SUV even lurched to a halt. Harper did not scream. Her years of surviving on the edge of the world, of anticipating the cruel blows of fate, took over completely. She threw herself entirely over Lily, forcing the little girl to the floorboards and covering the child's fragile body with her own. Outside, the world exploded into violence. Bullets hammered against the reinforced windows, creating terrifying, spider-web fractures in the thick glass. The driver shouted something incomprehensible before the passenger side window finally gave way, showering the interior with sharp, glittering diamonds of glass. The biting cold wind of the Chicago storm ripped into the cabin, carrying the metallic stench of blood and gunpowder. Damian kicked his door open, stepping directly into the storm of bullets to draw the fire away from the vehicle. Harper could hear him shouting orders, the terrifying, controlled bursts of his weapon returning fire, bringing a brutal death to anyone who dared approach his family. But the chaos was too thick, the ambush too well coordinated. A masked man with a snake tattoo creeping up his wrist materialized at the shattered window of the SUV, a heavy pistol aimed directly at Damian's exposed back. Time seemed to stop. Harper saw the weapon, saw the lethal intent in the attacker's eyes, and felt a primal, fierce roar tear through her own chest. She was not a killer, she was just a poor caretaker, but she would burn the world down before she let this monster kill the man who was fighting for them. Her hand scrambled blindly across the floorboards, her fingers wrapping around a heavy steel tactical flashlight the driver had dropped during the initial impact. Without a single second of hesitation, Harper lunged upward, driving the jagged metal bezel of the flashlight directly into the attacker's temple with every ounce of strength she possessed. The man screamed, his shot going wild and shattering the windshield instead of striking Damian. The distraction was all the Mafia boss needed. Damian spun around, his eyes locking onto the threat, and eliminated the attacker with 2 ruthless, deafening shots. The gunfire outside began to fade, replaced by the wailing of distant sirens and the heavy, ragged breathing of the survivors. Damian turned back to the vehicle, his expensive dark suit soaked in rain and the blood of his enemies. His chest heaved, his eyes wild and completely consumed by a dark, possessive terror as he looked through the shattered window. He saw Harper kneeling on the floor, her hands trembling violently, blood seeping from a small cut on her cheek where the glass had grazed her. But her amber eyes were blazing with a fierce, protective fire, her body still shielding the crying child beneath her. Damian dropped his weapon on the passenger seat and reached through the broken window, hauling the back door open with enough force to warp the hinges. He fell to his knees in the broken glass, pulling Harper and Lily into his massive, shaking arms. He buried his face in the crook of Harper's neck, breathing in the scent of vanilla and rain, his heart hammering a violent rhythm against her chest. "You are hurt," he rasped, his large, calloused thumb gently wiping the blood from her cheek. "I am fine," Harper whispered, her fingers burying themselves in his wet, dark hair, grounding the monster who had just slaughtered an army for them. "We are fine, Damian." He looked at her, truly looking at the unbelievable bravery of this woman who had just fought a trained killer with her bare hands to protect him. The final walls around his cold heart crumbled into dust. "You are mine," Damian vowed, his voice a raw, territorial growl that echoed louder than the sirens. "Both of you are mine to protect. And I swear to God, the men who ordered this will drown in their own blood by midnight." The return to the penthouse was a blur of heightened security and suffocating tension. Dozens of heavily armed men now patrolled the perimeter of the glass fortress, their faces grim and expectant. Inside, the silence was deafening, broken only by the soft, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. Harper sat on the edge of the velvet sofa in Damian's study, holding a trembling Lily against her chest. Her own hands were still shaking from the adrenaline of the ambush, the phantom weight of the heavy steel flashlight still burning in her palms. Damian stood by the window, a fresh glass of amber liquid completely untouched in his grip. His dark eyes were fixed on the city below, but his mind was tracing the violent puzzle of the Russian syndicate. If Nikolai Koff was willing to stage a brazen daylight assault in the middle of Chicago, he was desperate. And a desperate monster was the most dangerous kind. "He knows we have the child," Damian murmured, his voice a gravelly vibration that seemed to settle deep in Harper's bones. "He knows Lily is the only living witness to her mother's ledger. But a child's testimony means nothing to the cartel. They are terrified of the physical proof." Harper gently stroked Lily's dark curls, her amber eyes reflecting the soft glow of the desk lamp. "Isabella must have hidden it," Harper said quietly. "If she knew the syndicate was watching her, she would never have kept something so dangerous out in the open." Damian turned slowly, the mention of his daughter's name still a raw, bleeding wound, but now tempered by a fierce, blinding pride. He walked over to them, crouching down so his massive frame was level with the little girl. "Lily, sweetheart," Damian began, his tone impossibly gentle for a man who had just painted the streets with blood. "Do you remember anything about the notebook? Did Isabella ever tell you where she put the bad men's secrets?" Lily sniffled, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of Harper's oversized shirt. The child scrunched her face in deep concentration, the trauma of her past fighting against the safety of the present. "She said she locked the monsters away," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible in the cavernous room. "She said she put them behind the angels that cry in the rain." Damian froze, the breath catching in his throat. The angels that cry in the rain. He stood up abruptly, a sudden, devastating realization washing over his hardened features. She did not hide it at the cemetery, Damian realized aloud, his dark eyes meeting Harper's confused gaze. Before she died, she spent all her time at the old family estate, the mansion in Lake Forest. There is a stone fountain in the center of the conservatory, a fountain of weeping angels. Within an hour, a heavily armored convoy was tearing through the quiet, tree-lined streets of the wealthy suburb. The Vance family estate was a sprawling, Gothic masterpiece of dark stone and wrought iron, standing silent and imposing under the stormy night sky. Damian led them through the grand, dust-covered halls, his presence commanding the ghosts of his past to step aside. Harper stayed close to his side, carrying Lily, feeling the immense, tragic weight of the life Damian had abandoned after his daughter's death. They reached the glass-enclosed conservatory, the air inside thick with the scent of damp earth and overgrown jasmine. In the center stood a magnificent marble fountain, its basin dry, featuring 4 angelic figures with their faces buried in their hands. Damian approached the structure with a heavy, reverent step. He circled the weeping angels, his scarred fingers tracing the cold, carved stone. "Isabella used to read here for hours," he murmured, a rare vulnerability cracking his impenetrable facade. He stopped behind the tallest angel, his sharp eyes catching a slight inconsistency in the mortar at the base. With a swift, forceful strike of his heavy boot, The loose stone cracked and crumbled away, revealing a small, dark cavity hidden deep within the marble foundation. Damian reached inside and pulled out a thick, leather-bound notebook wrapped tightly in a waterproof plastic sleeve. He held it as if it were a live grenade. Harper stepped closer, the soft glow of the moonlight illuminating the dust dancing around them. Damian tore open the plastic and flipped through the yellowed pages. It was all there. Bank routing numbers, shipping container codes, the names of corrupt judges, police commissioners, and politicians who had sold their souls to the Russian syndicate. Isabella had meticulously documented every single piece of the monster's anatomy. She did it, Harper whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek as she looked at the neat, precise handwriting of a young woman who had sacrificed everything for the truth. She found a way to stop them. Damian stared at the pages, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles trembled. The grief that had paralyzed him for 3 months transmuted entirely into a cold, focused, apocalyptic rage. He closed the notebook, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet conservatory. "They murdered my daughter for this," Damian stated, his voice devoid of all warmth, completely possessed by the ruthless king of the underworld. "They slaughtered Lily's mother and tried to execute the only 2 people who have managed to make my heart beat again." He turned to Harper, his dark eyes burning with a terrifying, protective fire that made her breath hitch. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently cupping her face, his thumb tracing the soft curve of her jawline. "I am going to take you and Lily back to the penthouse," Damian bowed, his words a sacred, deadly oath. "I am going to lock you behind steel and glass, and then I am going to unleash hell on earth. I will not stop until Nikolai Koff and every man listed in this book is completely eradicated from this world." The penthouse felt like a suspended breath as Damian Vance prepared for war. Harper stood near the edge of the master bedroom, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, watching the man she was falling in love with transform entirely into a monster. Damian moved with terrifying, calculated precision. He strapped a heavy tactical vest over his crisp black shirt, concealing a small arsenal of lethal weaponry beneath his tailored wool coat. The ledger Isabella had died for was safely locked inside the penthouse vault, but its contents were permanently burned into Damian's mind. Every name, every location, every Russian operative who had dared to touch his family was marked for death. He paused at the door, turning back to look at Harper. She looked so fragile standing there, yet he knew she possessed a strength that rivaled his own. "Do not turn on the television tonight," Damian commanded softly, his voice a gravelly vibration that sent a shiver down her spine. "Do not look out the windows. Just stay here with Lily and know that when the sun rises, the men who hunted you will no longer exist." Harper stepped forward, her bare feet silent on the plush carpet, and reached out to press her palm flat against the center of his chest. She could feel the hard plates of the armor, but beneath it all, the steady, fierce beating of his heart. "Come back to us," she whispered, her amber eyes shining with unshed tears. Damian captured her face in his scarred, leather-gloved hands, pressing a fierce, searing kiss to her forehead. "Always," he vowed. When the elevator doors closed, the protective father vanished, leaving only the undisputed king of the Chicago underworld in his wake. The offensive strike began exactly at midnight. Damian did not just send his men. He led them, a shadow of death sweeping across the freezing, rain-slicked city. Their first target was the shipping yard on the south side, the nerve center of Nikolai Koff's human trafficking operation. The Russian guards never even had a chance to sound the alarm. Damian's syndicate descended upon them like a pack of starving wolves, their weapons equipped with suppressors that turned the violent slaughter into a series of terrifying, muted whispers. When the heavy iron doors of the shipping containers were thrown open, revealing dozens of terrified, shivering captives huddled in the darkness, Damian felt a fresh wave of murderous rage. He saw Lily in every single one of those frightened faces, saw the horrific fate that the monsters had planned for his granddaughter. He ordered his men to wrap the victims in warm coats and transport them to the safe houses he had secretly funded, ensuring they would vanish into new, protected lives. Then, he turned his attention back to the men responsible. There were no interrogations, no grand speeches, only the deafening, definitive roar of his weapon. Damian moved through the chaos with the cold, unfeeling grace of the Grim Reaper, his dark eyes empty of mercy. Every pull of his trigger was a tribute to Isabella, a payment for the terror Lily had endured, and a bloody offering to keep Harper safe. From the docks, the violence spilled into the city's hidden underground. Armed with the irrefutable evidence from the hidden ledger, Damian's lieutenants delivered swift, lethal ultimatums to the corrupt judges and police commissioners who had protected the Russian cartel. They were given a simple choice: turn a blind eye to the night's massacre or join the bodies floating in the freezing river. By 3 a.m, Nikolai Koff's empire was burning to the ground. Warehouses were engulfed in roaring flames, illegal casinos were reduced to shattered glass and splintered wood, and the syndicate's most ruthless enforcers were hunted down like vermin in the dark alleys. Damian did not flinch as the scent of smoke and copper soaked into his expensive clothes. He wanted the entire criminal underworld to smell the slaughter, to understand the apocalyptic consequences of threatening his blood and the woman he had claimed. He stood outside a burning distribution center, the orange flames reflecting in his dead, obsidian eyes. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Vincent, his voice tight with adrenaline over the chaotic background noise. "The ports are secured, boss, and the politicians have retreated like cowards. We broke their spine." Damian wiped a smear of ash from his jaw, his gaze fixed on the rising smoke that stained the night sky. "It is not enough," Damian rumbled, his voice colder than the winter wind. "Find Nikolai Koff. I want him alive. I want him to look into my eyes when I take everything from him." The war was not just business anymore. It was a deeply personal crusade, a violent purification of the city that had dared to break the people he loved. As the first pale rays of dawn began to bleed through the heavy gray clouds, Damian Vance stood victorious in the ashes of his enemies, cementing his terrifying legacy not just as a mafia boss, but as a protective monster who would gladly tear the world apart to keep his family safe. The heavy oak door of the master suite clicked shut, sealing away the violence of the outside world. Damian stood in the dim light of the entryway, stripping off his blood-soaked tactical vest with hands that finally began to tremble. The adrenaline of the massacre was fading, leaving behind the crushing, metallic weight of exhaustion and the unmistakable stench of smoke. He did not want to bring this darkness into the room where Harper slept, but when he turned toward the attached bathroom to wash the war from his skin, a soft voice stopped him in the shadows. "You came back." Harper was sitting by the edge of the sprawling king-sized bed, her legs pulled to her chest, wearing his oversized shirt like a shield. She had not slept a single minute. Damian paused, his broad, scarred chest heaving as he looked at the woman who had become the very center of his shattered world. "I told you I would," he replied, his voice a gravelly whisper ruined by the smoke of burning warehouses. He stepped further into the soft glow of the bedside lamp, exposing the bruised, bloodied state of his body. He expected her to flinch, to finally see the undeniable monster the rest of Chicago feared, but Harper only stood up and closed the distance between them. She reached out, her small, warm hands gently pressing against his ash-covered ribs. "Lily is asleep in the guest room," she murmured, her amber eyes searching his haunted, obsidian gaze. "And you are freezing, Damian." He closed his eyes, the simple sound of his name on her lips breaking the last iron walls around his heart. "I have done terrible things tonight, Harper," he confessed, the raw agony of his grief and guilt clawing at his throat. "Things that cannot be forgiven." Harper shook her head slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of a jagged, faded scar across his collarbone. "I am not looking for a saint," she whispered fiercely. "I am looking at a father who fought for his family." She led him into the pristine marble bathroom, turning on the hot water in the massive glass shower. The steam quickly filled the room, melting away the freezing Chicago chill. Damian stripped away his ruined clothes, standing before her with every physical and emotional scar exposed. His body was a roadmap of violence, marked by bullets and blades from a lifetime of ruling the underworld. There was a thick, silver line across his left side from a knife fight in his 20s, and a puckered burn mark near his shoulder that he had never bothered to hide. But Harper did not look away. She stepped into the warm water with him, fully clothed in his thin cotton shirt, the fabric instantly clinging to her fragile frame. She took a soft cloth and began to wash the blood and ash from his skin, her touches incredibly gentle, moving with the rhythmic, soothing cadence of a prayer. When I was 18, Harper spoke quietly over the sound of the falling water, offering her own pain as a bridge to his. My father walked out the door and never came back. My mother fell apart, seeking comfort in bottles and pills until her heart just gave out. I was left with mountains of debt and a target on my back. I spent the next 6 years making myself completely invisible so the debt collectors and the landlords would not notice we were drowning. She paused, her hands resting over the dragon crest tattoo on his chest, right above his violently beating heart. I thought if I stayed small, the world could not hurt me. But then I found Lily at the shelter, and I realized that staying small only lets the monsters win. Damian looked down at her, the water flattening her dark hair against her beautiful, resilient face. He reached out, his large hands cupping her cheeks, his thumbs gently wiping away the water, and the tears mingling on her skin. "You are the strongest person I have ever known," he rumbled, the absolute truth vibrating in his chest. "You stepped in front of a bullet for me. You held a traumatized child together when her entire world was destroyed. You are not invisible, little bird. You are the only thing I see." For 3 months, Damian had believed his capacity to love had been buried in the cold dirt alongside Isabella. He believed he was destined to live the rest of his days as a hollow shell of vengeance. But holding Harper, feeling the soft, undeniable beat of her heart against his own, he knew he was entirely alive. The distance between them vanished. Damian leaned down, capturing her lips in a kiss that tasted of rain, tears, and absolute surrender. It was not the forceful, demanding kiss of a mafia boss claiming a prize, but the desperate, reverent touch of a drowning man finally finding the surface. Harper responded with equal desperation, her hands tangling in his wet hair, pulling him closer until there was no space left between their broken pieces. The kiss deepened, sparking a consuming, protective fire that burned away the horrors of the night. He lifted her effortlessly, pressing her against the warm glass of the shower, his mouth trailing down her jaw and neck, worshipping the woman who had dared to love a monster. In the quiet, steam-filled sanctuary of the penthouse, Damian and Harper stripped away the last of their armor, forging a bond in the aftermath of blood that no syndicate, no enemy, and no tragic past could ever break. The morning sun cast long, deceptive shadows across the polished marble floors of the penthouse, offering a fragile illusion of peace after a night of fire and confessions. Harper stood in the massive kitchen, wearing one of Damian's gray sweaters that smelled faintly of his expensive cologne and the lingering smoke of the underworld. She was humming softly, watching Lily eat a plate of chocolate chip pancakes, believing with every fiber of her being that the monsters had been vanquished. Damian had left 3 hours ago, kissing her temple and promising to return before noon once the final remnants of the Russian syndicate were cleared from the city. He had left his most trusted lieutenant, Marco, in charge of the penthouse security, stationing heavily armed guards at every entrance. But the silence in the sprawling apartment suddenly felt entirely wrong. It was not the quiet, protective stillness of a fortress, but the suffocating, heavy deadness of a trap snapping shut. Harper paused, the silver spatula slipping from her fingers and clattering against the granite counter. She did not hear the usual muffled footsteps of the perimeter patrol. She did not hear the low crackle of the security radios. A primal, freezing instinct spiked in her blood, the same instinct that had kept her alive on the unforgiving streets of Chicago for 24 years. "Lily," Harper whispered, her voice trembling but incredibly calm. "I need you to take your rabbit and go into the hidden pantry behind the wine cellar. Do not make a sound until I come get you." The little girl's eyes went wide with familiar terror, but she did not argue, sliding off the stool and vanishing into the shadows just as the heavy oak doors of the kitchen swung open. Marco stepped into the room, his tailored black suit immaculate, his gun drawn and aimed directly at Harper's chest. Harper's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the man Damian trusted with his life. Behind Marco, 3 massive men wearing tactical gear stepped into the kitchen, their faces concealed, but the unmistakable, jagged snake scar creeping up the neck of the lead man made Harper's blood turn to ice. It was Nikolai Koff. The Russian kingpin had not fled the city. He had bought the one thing Damian Vance could not protect against: betrayal from within. "Where is the child?" Marco demanded, his voice devoid of any loyalty or remorse. Harper backed up against the counter, her hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Damian will kill you," she breathed, her amber eyes burning with a fierce, unwavering hatred. "He will tear you apart piece by piece." Marco sneered, shaking his head. "Damian is a dead man walking. He let his emotions make him weak, bringing a stray woman and a broken orphan into our business. Koff offered me the city, Harper. All I had to do was leave the front door unlocked." Nikolai stepped forward, his dead, soulless eyes scanning the massive kitchen, a cruel smile twisting his scarred face. "The little bird has teeth," the Russian mocked, pulling a heavy silver pistol from his coat. But teeth did not stop bullets. "Find the brat. We need her to draw Vance into the open." The mercenaries began tearing the kitchen apart, shattering expensive plates and overturning heavy marble tables. Harper's heart hammered a violent, deafening rhythm against her ribs. She knew they would find the pantry. She knew she had only seconds to act before Lily was dragged back into the hell she had just escaped. Without a single thought for her own safety, Harper grabbed a heavy cast iron pan from the stove and hurled it directly at Nikolai's head, screaming for Lily to run. The heavy metal clipped the Russian boss on the shoulder, sending him staggering backward with a roar of pain. Harper lunged toward the hallway, desperate to draw their attention away from the hidden door, but Marco was faster. He struck her viciously across the face with the butt of his weapon. The world exploded into a blinding flash of white light, and Harper hit the floor hard, tasting blood and cold marble. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Lily scream. A massive mercenary dragged the kicking, sobbing child from the shadows, holding her suspended by the collar of her shirt. Harper tried to crawl forward, her vision swimming, her fingers desperately reaching for the little girl. "Let her go," Harper sobbed, her voice cracking as blood dripped from her split lip. Nikolai stood over her, pressing the barrel of his weapon against the back of her head. "Bring them both," the Russian ordered coldly. "Vance loves this piece of trash as much as he loves the kid. When he comes for them, we will bury them all together." Darkness clawed at the edges of Harper's vision as rough hands dragged her to her feet, pulling her out of the gilded cage and straight into the jaws of the monster. Hours later, the private elevator door slid open, and Damian stepped into his penthouse, calling Harper's name. He stopped dead. The kitchen was destroyed, blood stained the pristine marble, and the silence was absolute. Damian dropped his weapon, falling to his knees as a roar of pure, apocalyptic agony tore through his chest, a sound that promised the entire city of Chicago was about to burn to ash. The roar that tore from Damian Vance's throat in the ruined kitchen of his penthouse was not a sound made by a human being. It was the apocalyptic cry of a leviathan whose heart had been ripped from its chest. He stared at the smeared blood on the pristine white marble, the shattered plates, the deafening silence where Harper's warm humming should have been. Vincent, his loyal second in command, rushed through the splintered oak doors a moment later, his weapon drawn, taking in the devastation with wide, horrified eyes. "Boss," Vincent breathed, lowering his gun. "Marco disabled the perimeter alarms 10 minutes before you arrived. They took them. Koth has them." Damian did not scream again. The explosive, blinding rage instantly froze into a cold, hyper-focused state of pure, unadulterated death. He stood up slowly, the shards of glass crunching beneath his heavy boots. His dark eyes were completely black, devoid of any mercy, any humanity, any hesitation. "Find where Marco's tracker last pinged before he went dark," Damian commanded, his voice a terrifying, soulless whisper that made the hairs on Vincent's arms stand up. "Call every single man we have left. Tell them to bring heavy armor and incendiary rounds. We are not making arrests, Vincent. We are making a graveyard." It took exactly 22 minutes for the Syndicate's elite hackers to pinpoint a heavily encrypted signal bouncing from an abandoned steel mill on the desolate outskirts of the city. The storm that had drenched Chicago for 3 days had finally broken, leaving behind a freezing, bitter wind that howled through the rusted iron skeleton of the old factory. Damian arrived in a convoy of 5 armored black SUVs, leading an army of 50 heavily armed soldiers. He stepped out into the freezing night, holding a customized assault rifle, his expensive wool coat flapping in the wind. He did not bother with stealth. He wanted the Russian kingpin to know exactly what was coming for him. Damian raised his weapon and fired his single, deafening shot into the heavy iron doors of the mill. The metal groaned and gave way as his men breached the perimeter, flooding the dark, cavernous space with blinding tactical lights and a hail of relentless, suppressing fire. The Russian mercenaries inside, emboldened by their temporary victory, were completely unprepared for the sheer, suicidal ferocity of Damian's assault. The Mafia boss moved through the flying bullets and exploding concrete like a dark god of war, never flinching, never slowing down. He shot down 3 masked men in the main corridor without breaking his stride, stepping over their bodies with chilling indifference. The scent of copper and gunpowder choked the freezing air, but Damian only smelled the faint memory of vanilla and warm milk. He reached the central processing floor, a massive, rusted arena illuminated by flickering emergency lights. And there, chained to a heavy steel pipe in the center of the room, was Harper. Her beautiful face was bruised and swollen, blood dried on her chin, but she was leaning forward, using her own battered body to completely shield a sobbing Lily from the surrounding chaos. Standing over them, holding a heavy pistol to Harper's temple, was Nikolai Koff, with the traitor Marco trembling slightly by his side. "Drop the weapon, Vance," Nikolai shouted over the echoing gunfire, his jagged snake scar twisting into a cruel, desperate smile. "Or the little bird loses her head." Damian stopped 20 feet away. He did not drop his rifle. He did not negotiate. He looked directly into Harper's amber eyes, seeing the absolute terror, but also the fierce, unwavering trust burning within them. She knew he would not let them die. "Marco," Damian said softly, his voice carrying effortlessly across the rusted room. The traitor flinched, his gun wavering. "You sold my family for a city you will never live to rule." Before Marco could even process the words, Damian snapped his pistol up with his left hand and put a single bullet perfectly between the traitor's eyes. Marco collapsed like a broken puppet. Nikolai Koff roared in fury, pressing his weapon harder against Harper's skull, preparing to pull the trigger. But Harper, the invisible, impoverished caretaker who had spent her life surviving the cruelest blows, moved with lightning speed. She threw her head backward, slamming her skull directly into Nikolai's broken nose. The Russian stumbled, crying out in agony, his shot firing wildly into the steel ceiling. It was the only opening Damian needed. He closed the 20 feet between them in 3 massive strides, tossing his rifle aside and tackling the Russian kingpin with the force of a freight train. The 2 men crashed onto the concrete, But it was not a fight. It was an execution. Damian straddled the monster who had murdered his daughter, terrorized a child, and dared to bleed the woman he loved. He did not use a gun. He used his bare, scarred hands, wrapping them around Nikolaikov's throat and squeezing until the light permanently left the Russian's dead, soulless eyes. When it was finally over, Damian rose slowly, his chest heaving, his hands coated in the blood of his enemies. He turned to Harper, who was desperately trying to untie the heavy ropes binding her to the pipe, her tears mixing with the dust on her cheeks. Damian dropped to his knees in the dirt and grime, his massive hands gently brushing hers aside to snap the restraints with terrifying ease. He pulled Harper and Lily into his chest, burying his face in the crook of Harper's neck, breathing in the scent of their survival. "I have you," Damian rasped, his voice breaking completely as he held the two fragile pieces of his heart together. "I have you, and I swear to God, the monsters are gone forever." 6 months had passed since the freezing night the steel mill burned to the ground, taking the last remnants of the Russian syndicate with it. The Chicago winter had finally surrendered to the soft, golden warmth of spring, and the sprawling penthouse 50 stories above the city had transformed completely. It was no longer a gilded tomb of glass and silence. As Damian Vance stepped out of his private elevator, he did not smell the metallic scent of blood or the bitter tang of gunpowder. Instead, the air was thick with the sweet aroma of baking vanilla and the bright, echoing sound of a child laughing. He walked silently down the polished marble hallway, loosening his expensive silk tie, his dark eyes softening as he reached the living room. Harper was sitting on the plush rug near the floor-to-ceiling windows, her dark hair tumbling over her shoulders as she helped Lily paint bright, clumsy watercolors onto a thick canvas. The little girl, who had once been too terrified to speak above a whisper, was chattering endlessly about the stray cat she had seen in the courtyard earlier that day. Damian leaned against the doorframe, a dangerous, ruthless king brought entirely to his knees by the breathtaking sight of his family. The underworld still feared him. His empire was stronger and more terrifying than ever, his enemies eradicated or forced into absolute submission. But inside these walls, he was simply a man who had been saved by the very people he swore to protect. Harper looked up, her amber eyes catching his, and a brilliant, unrestrained smile broke across her beautiful face. She stood up, brushing a streak of blue paint from her worn denim jeans, and walked toward him. She did not hesitate to wrap her arms around his neck, burying her face in the hollow of his collarbone. "You are home early," she murmured, pressing a soft kiss to the scarred skin of his jaw. Damian wrapped his massive arms around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest, breathing in her scent like it was oxygen. "There was nothing out there that mattered more than being right here," he rumbled, his voice a deep, vibrating purr that belonged only to her. He looked over Harper's shoulder at Lily, who had abandoned her paints and was running toward them with her arms wide open. Damian crouched down, effortlessly scooping the 7-year-old girl into his embrace, kissing her forehead as she wrapped her small arms tightly around his neck. "Look at my painting, Damian," Lily demanded happily, pointing to the chaotic swirl of colors on the floor. "It is our family. You, me, Harper, and Isabella looking down from heaven." A lump formed in Damian's throat, thick and heavy with a grief that had finally healed into profound gratitude. He looked at the painting, then at the fierce, resilient woman standing beside him, the invisible caretaker who had thrown herself into a war zone and pieced his shattered soul back together. Later that night, after Lily was tucked safely into bed with her battered stuffed rabbit, Damian and Harper stood together on the glass balcony, looking out over the glittering skyline of the city he ruled. The wind was warm, carrying the promise of a new beginning. Damian reached into the pocket of his tailored suit and pulled out a small, velvet box. He did not drop to one knee. He simply opened it, revealing a stunning, flawless diamond ring, and looked directly into Harper's amber eyes. "I am a man of violence, Harper," Damian said quietly, his dark gaze burning with absolute, unwavering devotion. "My world is dark, and my hands will never truly be clean. But you're my light. You are the only queen this empire will ever have, and I will spend my last breath ensuring you and our daughter never know fear again. Marry me." Harper's breath hitched, her eyes shining with tears of pure joy. She looked at the man who had torn the city apart for her, the monster who treated her like a miracle. "Yes," she whispered, her voice fierce and certain. "Always yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of forever, proving that sometimes the most broken hearts are the ones capable of the greatest love. And that brings us to the end of our journey today on Sunni romance. We have watched a ruthless mafia boss and an invisible, impoverished caretaker forge a beautiful family out of tragedy, blood, and unbreakable loyalty. What did you think of Damian and Harper's incredible story of redemption and love? Have you ever had a moment in your life where someone unexpected stepped in and changed your entire world? Please let us know your thoughts in the comments below, because we read every single one and love hearing from you. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button, subscribe to Sunni Romance, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that true love can conquer even the darkest shadows. Thank you so much for listening. Stay safe, keep believing in love, and we will see you in the next story.